He was the only man on that flight deck who didn't run. 60 volunteers in matching polo shirts, a few hundred visitors with cameras, and a 4.5-ton helicopter starting to roll toward the edge of a carrier deck 8 stories above the harbour. And the one person who walked toward it instead of away was a 79-year-old in a sun-faded ball cap. The kid working the rope barrier put a hand out to stop him. Sir, you need to step back behind the line." His voice cracked on the second word. Behind him, the old Sea King groaned against a single corroded chain. The deck tilted maybe half a degree on the wake of a passing tanker, and the helicopter's main wheels began to creep across the nonskid like something waking up. If you've ever done a job nobody ever clapped for, held a line, stood a watch, kept something safe while everyone else looked the other way, type steady in the comments right now, because you already understand this man, and the story hasn't even told you who he is yet. His name was Earl Voss, and he had driven 4 hours that morning to stand on a ship he had not set foot on in 51 years. He came alone. He came early, he paid the $18 admission like everyone else, and he did not tell the woman at the ticket window that the grey mountain of steel in front of her had once been his entire world. That was not Earl's way. He wore a windbreaker gone soft at the elbows, and a ball cap so faded you could barely read the ship's name stitched across the front, and he moved the way old sailors move on a deck, knees soft, weight low, one hand never far from something solid. People stepped around him without seeing him. A boy asked his father if the old man was lost. Earl heard it and only smiled, because in a way he was. He had spent the morning standing very still in front of one particular aircraft, a Sikorsky Sea King hauled up from the hangar bay and parked on the flight deck for the open house weekend, and he had not been able to make his feet carry him any closer to it. He just stood there, reading a number painted small on the tail. He had not said one word to anyone in 2 hours. The museum had repositioned 3 aircraft onto the flight deck for the event, and the Sea King was the heaviest of them. The crew that moved it were good kids, earnest kids, most of them in their late teens and 20s, volunteers who gave up their Saturdays to polish brass and answer questions about a war that ended before their parents were born. Not one of them had ever secured a live aircraft on a moving deck, because nothing on this ship had moved under power in 3 decades. They had chopped the wheels and run 2 tie-down chains, the way the maintenance binder said to, and they had checked the box and moved on. What the binder did not say was that one of the deck pad eyes had been quietly rusting under its paint since the Ford administration, and that a fully fueled-looking display helicopter sitting on a slick deck is a very different animal from a static model when 11,000 tons of moored carrier decides to lean. The tanker came down the channel at 11:40. Its wake reached the carrier a minute later, a long, low swell that lifted the great ship's stern and set it gently rocking, the way a sleeping giant shifts and never wakes. On any working flight deck it would have been nothing, but the corroded pad eye let go with a sound like a dropped wrench, the forward chain went slack, and the Sea King's 9,000 pounds found the downhill side of the world. The chocks skidded. The kid on the rope line turned around just in time to see a helicopter the size of a city bus begin to slide, slow and unstoppable, toward the 400-foot drop to the water. For 1 full second, nobody did anything. That is the thing people never believe about emergencies, that the first thing that happens is nothing at all. The volunteers froze. A woman screamed and grabbed her son. A man in a polo shirt with EP visor on the badge actually put both hands up, palms out, as if he could push the aircraft back by wanting it badly enough. And he yelled the only thing his training had given him. "Everybody back! Get back, get back!" Which was exactly wrong, because getting back was the one thing that would let that bird go over the side. He didn't know that. He wasn't a bad man. He was a 31-year-old finance graduate who ran the gift shop and had been handed a clipboard and a title, and in his whole life, nobody had ever taught him what to do when the deck moved under an airplane. He was about to learn from the last person anyone expected. Earl was already moving. He came through the crowd low and fast, faster than a 79-year-old has any right to move, ducking under the rope line as the supervisor shouted at him to stop. He did not stop. He put one hand flat on the Sea King's belly as it slid past him, not to push it, you cannot push 9,000 pounds, but to read it, to feel which way it wanted to go. And then he started calling out numbers in a voice that did not sound like an old man's voice at all. It sounded like a deck chocks. I need chocks, both mains, fore and aft. No WU, blue shirt, the yellow blocks behind you, throw them here, don't carry them, Tero-o, a teenager threw them. Earl kicked the first chock under the rolling wheel with the side of his boot. Time to the half second the tyre rode up over it, the slide hitched, other side, same thing. You, the chain by your foot, that's a tie down, run it to the pad eye at your 2 o'clock. The painted ring, hook it and pull the slack. Do not stand inboard of that chain. Stand outboard, always outboard. 3 kids moved at once. He had given them their hands back. He worked the way. You only work when your body remembers something your mind stopped thinking about decades ago. Cross chain forward to arrest the roll, then the aft tie downs to kill the swing, then tension, snug it, don't crank it like a lug nut, you'll shear the link, just take the slack. He counted them through it the same way he had counted 10,000 aircraft, threw it on a deck that pitched 20 feet in a South China Sea swell. Back when getting it wrong meant a jet in the water and a man inside it. On my count, 3, 2, 1, steady. And the Sea King stopped. 40 seconds, maybe 50, from the moment the chain let go to, the moment the old helicopter sat locked down tighter than it had been all day. 4 chains and a cross pattern, chocks fore and aft, dead still on a deck that was still gently rocking. Earl Voss straightened up, put one hand on the small of his back, and said to no one, "There she is." The deck had gone completely silent. 200 people who had just watched an aircraft nearly go over the side were now all looking at the same old man in the same faded cap, and not one of them knew his name. The supervisor with a clipboard was the first to speak, and to his enormous credit, what he said was not a defense of himself. He said very quietly, "How did you, who taught you to do that?" And Earl, wiping rust off his palm onto his windbreaker, gave the answer. These stories always turn on. He looked up at the grey island of the ship, at the painted numbers and the bridge wings and the rust streaks weeping down from 50 years of weather, and he said, "She did." That was when the museum's curator came running up the flight deck with a radio in her hand, and a few steps behind her, walking with a cane, and not hurrying because men of a certain rank never hurry, came an old man in a blue blazer with a small gold pin on the lapel. The volunteers didn't know him either. But the curator did, and so did the framed photograph hanging in the wardroom 2 decks below, because the man with the cane was a retired rear admiral and he was the museum's honorary chairman, and 53 years ago he had been a 26-year-old lieutenant flying an A4 Skyhawk off this exact ship. The curator had called him, moment the chain let go, not knowing what else to do. He had been in the parking lot. He came up onto the deck expecting to find a disaster. Instead he found a quiet crowd, a helicopter chained down hard, and an old man in a windbreaker reading a number on a tail. The Admiral did not look at Earl first. He looked at the helicopter. He walked up to it slow, put his hand on the same belly Earl had touched, and then he found the small white number painted on the tail boom, Bureau number 149711, and the whole colour went out of his face. He stood there a long moment. Then he turned around and looked at the old deckhand the way you look at a ghost, and his voice, when it finally came, was not an admiral's voice. It was just a man's. "I know this aircraft," he said. "This is the bird that pulled me out of the water. Here is the part Earl would never have told you himself, because men like Earl do not tell it. In the spring of 1972, off a place in the Gulf of Tonkin, the pilots called Yankee Station, A young lieutenant's A4 took a hit climbing off a target, the engine quit, and he rode it down to the edge of his luck and ejected over open water in weather that had grounded everything else on the ship. The Plane Guard helicopter. This helicopter was the only thing that launched. And the only reason it launched was a deck handler who saw the Mayday call, ran to that spot before the order even came, ripped the tie-downs off a cold bird by himself, and got it turning and clear in under 4 minutes so the crew could go get a man none of them had ever met out of a sea that was trying to swallow him. The lieutenant spent 40 minutes in that water. The Sea King found him with about 10 of those minutes left in him. He never knew the name of the sailor on the deck who'd torn the chains off in the dark. For 53 years he had wanted to know it. "I owe my whole life," the Admiral said, and his voice broke clean in half, "to whoever was standing on this deck that night." And Earl, who had not meant to say anything at all, said the smallest true thing in the world. "I was, sir." If a story has ever made you understand what the word service actually costs, type Hona in the comments, and don't scroll past, because the deepest part of this is still coming. Because the Admiral asked him the question everyone was thinking, why are you here after all these years alone, on a Saturday, and Earl finally let it out. The thing he had driven 4 hours and stood frozen 2 hours to be near. He had not come for the Admiral, he had not come to be thanked or recognised or to fix anything. He had come for the man whose name he could not look at without his throat closing, the pilot of that Sea King, the man Earl had launched 100 times and trusted with his own count, his closest friend on the ship, and who had taken this same airframe out on the next cruise on a routine Plane Guard hop and gone into the water himself in a fog off the Philippines and never come back up. They never recovered him. There was no grave. There was nothing left of him anywhere on this earth. Except this helicopter. This exact bird hauled up to a museum deck and parked in the sun for families to photograph, the last physical thing in the world that his friend had ever sat inside. "When that chain let go," Earl said, looking at the deck and not at any of them. "I wasn't thinking about the airplane. I've watched that man go in the water once already. I just couldn't stand to watch the last of him go over the side too. Not twice, not while I had." Hands, nobody on that flight deck said a word. The supervisor with the clipboard had tears running down his face and was not bothering to wipe them. The teenagers Earl had ordered around 40 minutes earlier were standing the way young people stand when they have just understood something they will carry for the rest of their lives. And the Admiral, a man who had commanded 10,000 sailors, did the only thing left for a man to do. He came to attention, old knees, cane and all, and he raised his hand to that faded ball cap in a slow, perfect salute, and he held it until Earl, embarrassed, ducked his head and waved him off the way old friends wave off too much honour. Then the Admiral reached out and shook the hand that had torn the chains off a cold helicopter twice 53 years apart, and saved the same aircraft both times, once with a man inside it, once with a memory. They did not let Earl drive home alone that day. The museum sat him down in the wardroom under the photographs of men his age, and the curator wrote down every word he would give her, which was not many, because that is who he is. They found his friend's name in the ship's records, and they are putting it on a small brass plate that will hang beside Bureau number 149711 for as long as the ship floats, so that every family who photographs that helicopter will read the name of the man who flew it and never came home, and will not walk past him the way they walked past Earl all morning. They asked Earl if he would come back and teach the volunteers how to secure an aircraft properly, how to read a deck, how to feel which way a thing wants to go before it goes there. He said he would think about it. 3 weeks later, he was back in the same windbreaker, the same cap, kneeling on the non-skid with a 19-year-old, showing him how to throw a chock instead of carry it. The supervisor still runs the gift shop, but he keeps a chock on the shelf behind the register, now a real one, and when school groups come through, he tells them about the day he yelled the wrong order on a flight deck, and an old man in a faded cap quietly taught him the right one. Hand. He tells them you can run a place for years and not know the first thing about it. He tells them the man you walk past might be the only one in the building who knows what to do. And Earl Voss still drives the 4 hours, more weekends than not. He stands in the same spot he stood that first morning, in front of the same grey bird, reading the same small white number on the tail. But he does not stand frozen anymore, and he does not stand alone. He puts one weathered hand flat on the cold belly of the helicopter, the way you steady something, the way you keep something from going over the side, and he stays there a while, an old deck handler and the last airframe his best friend ever touched, 2 old things the sea didn't get, holding each other steady on a deck that no longer moves. If you believe the people who quietly hold the line are the ones who deserve to be remembered, the watch, standers, the chain runners, the ones who walk toward the thing everyone else runs from, then subscribe, and stay, and help us make sure not one of them goes over the side forgotten. Because somewhere near you, right now, there's a man in a faded cap who still knows exactly what to do. All anybody ever had to do was ask his name.